B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, August 22nd, 2018. Our sporadic schedule of podcast delivery will continue. Tomorrow, we're going to demolish this wall to my left here, and then a crew is supposed to come in this weekend and remodel the secret studio. We don't have an exact ETA on when the work will be completed. I do have a backup plan to possibly borrow a friend's studio next week if necessary, but just check in at peterbcollins.com and you'll be able to see when the next podcast is posted. That's the best I can tell you. Yesterday I took a personal day, and I took an old friend, yes, he's over 85, out to lunch. And while we were at lunch at the bar, they had a TV tuned to CNN, and the split screen reported the near simultaneous announcements of the jury verdict finding Paul Manafort guilty on 8 of 18 counts, mostly fraud and tax evasion. And the surprise was that Michael Cohen, Trump's former personal attorney, the guy who's recorded some of his conversations with the Donald, he took a guilty plea. And his guilty plea specifically includes Trump in the conspiracy that produced the hush money payoffs to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. And while the written statement, the guilty plea document, referred to the president as Candidate 1, when Michael Cohen was quizzed by the judge asked him a lot of questions, and I give Rachel Maddow credit. She did a great job of a dramatic reading of the transcript of the guilty plea hearing of Michael Cohen in federal court. The judge asked him if he knew what he was doing. Cohen said yes. He asked him if his lawyers had approved what he was about to do to fall on the sword. He said yes. And then he articulated that in an effort to influence the 2016 election, that he secretly colluded with the National Enquirer to silence Karen McDougal, and that he borrowed money on his home equity line in order to fund the $130,000 payoff to Stormy Daniels via her attorney Michael Avenatti. And that is a violation, at least he pled guilty to a violation of campaign finance regulations. Now, this directly implicates the sitting president. He is an unindicted co-conspirator. And that was Nixon's status. And if you're a regular listener, you know that your humble host here developed his chops as a talk show host and an interviewer during the Watergate scandal. And all of this today prompts me to ask why no one else is demanding that Donald Trump resign, and resign immediately. In a moment, we'll get to the political dance around impeachment. But the president is clearly vulnerable to a criminal conviction. And if he had any sense of shame or decency, he would submit his resignation today. So the New York Times turned to Popat, criminal defense attorney, former federal prosecutor Ken White, and he made some interesting comments. That the president's personal lawyer pleaded guilty to a federal crime and testified under oath that the president told him to do it. Cohen pleading guilty to 2 federal campaign finance violations, and according to Cohen, testifying under oath, that in coordination with and at the direction of Trump, the charging document describes a scheme to pay off Karen McDougal, the former Playboy model, and Stormy Daniels to buy their silence about their affairs with Trump. Cohen admitted to arranging for American Media, the publisher of the National Enquirer, to pay McDougal $150,000 to keep her quiet, and he also admitted to arranging to pay Daniels $130,000 for her silence. And Popat says that implicates the president directly in what might be called collusion, a conspiracy to commit a series of federal crimes, although he acknowledges not with Russians. And this is what I find so amusing, that many of the champions of the Russiagate narrative are doing victory laps to see Manafort convicted and the guilty plea from Cohen. And while Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, who I met one time at a TV studio in Washington, is all over the media, you cannot find a channel that hasn't interviewed Lanny Davis in the last 24 hours. And he's making it very clear that Cohen has stuff to dish up on Trump for Robert Mueller, the special counsel. And while there was no plea agreement about leniency for Michael Cohen, that is implicit in this public exchange. Davis tweeted out, if those payments were a crime for Michael Cohen, then why wouldn't they be a crime for Donald Trump? A final quote here from Popat. Trump's status, for now, as president likely immunizes him from indictment and prosecution, but he's not immune from impeachment, nor is he immune from being implicated as an unindicted co-conspirator in a raft of other indictments. Especially if Democrats manage the blue wave of their dreams in the midterms, the once cocky fixer Michael Cohen, now humbled, could find himself a star witness at hearings on impeachment for our 45th president. And I understand the complexities of impeachment. I covered the Nixon impeachment. I, like many others, was riveted by the attempt to impeach Bill Clinton. It's not an easy process. It takes years. Some special counsel investigations have taken 6 or 7 years. The Iran-Contra affair did. And so the dreams of Trump allies that this should be over soon will not be realized. And that split screen yesterday of seeing Manafort's jury reach a verdict and Cohen plead guilty almost at the same moment, it struck me as reminiscent of the last big Republican split screen moment when Ronald Reagan was on one side of the screen taking the oath of office in January of 1981, and the Iranian hostages were winging their way back from Tehran on the left side of the screen. Clear evidence to me of the October surprise, the treasonous pre-election agreement between Ronald Reagan's CIA director, Bill Casey, and the Iranians. So we have a very serious development. And while Robert Mueller was not directly involved in the plea agreement with Michael Cohen, it was handled by the Southern District of New York in Manhattan. That district, a U.S. attorney, not district attorney. Many people just immediately say, well, this proves that Russiagate is real and that Russia meddled in the election. And so far, it does not. Now, Lanny Davis has clearly said that Michael Cohen has information on hacking. But it's a teaser, and that's as much as we know at this point. And if Michael Cohen has testimony that Donald Trump had advanced knowledge of the hacking of the DNC and that data being transferred to WikiLeaks, I'll certainly accept it. It would be far more convincing, far more credible and persuasive than all the hoo-ha that we've endured in the last 2 years coming from the national intelligence community. Michael Cohen, through Lanny Davis, is saying that he would not accept a pardon if Donald Trump offered it to him. Now, I don't believe that. Number one, if he does offer Michael Cohen a pardon, it could complicate his own situation because it is one of the few cases where a pardon could be part of a corrupt bargain. And I think Trump has to face the same issues if he's going to try to issue a pardon to Paul Manafort. And the only surprise for me in the Manafort case is that the jury wrangled over some of the charges and could not agree to a unanimous guilty verdict on 10 of the 18. Some of that could be Judge Elias, who was pretty squirrely in the courtroom. But from my armchair and watching and reading the news, it seemed to me that Manafort was really cornered, and that the evidence was clear that he evaded U.S. taxes, failed to report, conducted bank fraud in trying to get the loan from that little bank in Chicago, dangling an appointment in the Trump administration to the leader of that bank. But again, it doesn't have anything to do with Russiagate. And we haven't seen any effort to cut a deal with Manafort which would facilitate any kind of disclosures from him about the alleged meddling by Russia and collusion with the Trump campaign. In a strong editorial, the New York Times today says the cases of both men are at the moment tangential to the central questions of Mueller's inquiry, whether Trump and his associates conspired with Russia's election interference, which they now treat as fact, and whether the president tried to obstruct the Justice Department's investigation into the matter. As you know, I believe that the obstruction charges can be proven. And now that we have Cohen on the hush money deals, there is plenty to impeach Trump with. All that is lacking is the political will, first by Democrats and then by reluctant Republicans. Trump's lawyer, Rudy 9/11 Giuliani, the man who said that truth isn't truth, well, he tried to massage the truth by saying, there's no allegation of any wrongdoing against the president in the government's charges against Mr. Cohen. It's clear that Mr. Cohen's actions reflect a pattern of lies and dishonesty over a significant period of time. Sorry, Rudy, that's bullshit, and you knew it as soon as it came out of that mouth of yours. And this is what they are reduced to in trying to pander to the Trump base, say, oh, no, this is all a witch hunt, it's all just concocted. And the Times editorial says that these convictions and Trump's status as an unindicted co-conspirator could make Trump at risk of impeachment, even if the sprawling Russia investigation never definitively concludes that there was collusion or obstruction of justice. That from one of the ardent promoters of the Russiagate narrative. And here we get to the dance that's underway in Washington. Paul Ryan, the lame duck Speaker of the House, issued a terse statement. We're aware of Cohen's guilty plea. We will need more information that is currently available at this point. And Lindsey Graham offered this little word salad. The American legal system is working its will. Thus far, there have yet to be any charges or convictions for colluding with the Russian government by any member of the Trump campaign. I hope Mueller can conclude his investigation sooner rather than later for the benefit of the nation. Well, that's wishful thinking. And then Orrin Hatch, the sage lame duck senator from Utah. Those are some serious charges, and they can't be ignored. I'm not very happy about it, I'll put it that way, and should never have happened to begin with. Well, these people are ducking their obligation under the Constitution to impeach this sorry guy who is posing as President of the United States. But to the leader of the Democrats, well, Chuck Schumer, he pivoted to talking about the Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, saying that should be put on hold because this is a game changer. That's rhetoric, but it's not going to happen. And Nancy Pelosi, according to The Guardian, was surprisingly measured as she steered the party away from focusing on a mission to impeach Trump quickly. Impeaching Trump is, quote, not a priority for Democrats, and despite the implications of the Manafort and Cohen cases, impeachment has to spring from something else, Pelosi told the Associated Press. What the hell is something else, Nancy? What more do you need? Well, you need courage, you need leadership, and you need to be willing to lose some seats in order to stand for principle. And despite her dance and this ludicrous effort to pretend that Democrats wouldn't support impeachment if they got the House majority back, Steve Bannon called their bluff. Tonight brings November into complete focus, he said. It will be an up or down vote on the impeachment of the president. The Democrats have long wanted this fight, and now they have it. That's the way Karl Rove played it out in 2006 and intimidated Pelosi against impeachment. She famously kept it off the table. And that's where we are right now. And this is what reduces me to saying, well, if we're stalled on impeachment, if Democrats don't have the nerve and Republicans don't have the moral compass, then we ought to at least lead the charge to call on this guy to resign. In either event, we get Mike Pence. And I'm not very happy about that. But in the face of clear criminal activity, provable criminal activity by the guy who sits in the Oval Office, anything less than active calls for impeachment and resignation really is just inexcusable. And by the way, there's a new book out called The Constitution Demands It, The Case for Impeachment of Donald Trump. As soon as we get the studio all back up and running, I will schedule an interview with one or more of the 3 legal scholars who have authored this. And I also want to note that Roots Action, rootsaction.org, has an impeachment petition on their homepage, and they tweaked the issue a little bit by saying to the media, a petition reading, "Please invite Rudy Giuliani on your programs more often for longer periods of time and with more freedom to express his views at length. You will be doing this country a service." But not so fast, says the Guardian op-ed writer Martin Kettle. I don't know Martin, but I assume he's a British guy, and he weighed in on American impeachment options by saying that impeaching Trump would risk being more like the Clinton case, that it could end up where he is charged by the House but not removed by the Senate. Now, that is correct. It's possible. But impeachment is a wave operation. It builds, and somebody has to start it. And if the Democrats keep ducking and dodging the issue, they've already missed a big opportunity to force Republicans to go on the record before this midterm election and tell their voters whether they will stand with Trump, no matter what crimes may be charged. And this guy Kettle writes, in other words, there's no way at this stage that an impeachment move against Trump would succeed, because there will always be 34 senators who will vote for him to stay. Well, I don't agree with that. We have to create the power vacuum that requires them to take a position. We have to threaten them with losing their jobs at the ballot box. That's what will cause the sea change that is needed. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Generous people like Abby and Mike McMillan, the fine folks from Maine that I got to meet for dinner in Belfast a few weeks ago. The incredible faith peoples, Ethan Knox, Andrew Rush, they all kick in between $5 and $20 a month to support the PBC podcast. And I'd like you to kick in too. You know, give up a hipster coffee or maybe, I don't know, some other little indulgence and kick in $5 a month right over here. Just visit peterbcollins.com, find the menu tab and click on that. Then pull down on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page, and you can make a choice, $5, $10, $20 a month. With a $50 annual subscription and a U.S. mailing address, you get a copy of John Dist's new rock and roll CD called American University. And for those allergic to PayPal, yo comprende, you can address your correspondence to my P.O. Box. Box 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150660, San Rafael, zip 94915. So, to distract his base, Trump, of course, had been tweeting incessantly, and then he took a side trip to West Virginia yesterday, where he held one of those mob rallies where they talked about locking her up, but not locking up Michael Cohen or Paul Manafort or Donald Trump. Yeah, it was a bizarre setting. And Trump was trying to build on the announcement made by the EPA yesterday to relax pollution regulations of coal-fired power plants. And this, of course, is another rollback of Obama-era progress. And what's interesting, as the New York Times points out today, is that these are failing efforts because there are more than 200 coal-fueled power plants that have shut down in the last 8 years. There are another 40 that have announced they're closing over the next few years, and there have been no new plants built. So it's a declining market, and even if Trump is able to gin up a short-term renaissance of the coal industry, well, the jobs have been cut, and the die is cast. So this is another meaningless move to try to appeal to the coal miners who Hillary told were going to be put out of work. That was a poor moment for her. But he's lying to them. And they'll accept it because they're kind of desperate there in West Virginia. Trump also availed himself of his typical immigrant-bashing tactics, and he's got a fresh case to demagogue on because there is a 24-year-old undocumented guy named Christian Rivera who has confessed to the rape and murder of a University of Iowa student who disappeared last month. Now, I don't ordinarily comment on these cases. It's a local issue. It's tragic that there has been a crime committed, and it's inconvenient that it is by an undocumented, what the right wing would call an illegal alien. But Trump takes these things and blows them so far out of proportion, making it seem like every doorstep is being spied upon by a dangerous illegal who has dark intentions. And we know it's not true, but he gets away with it because there are people who are predisposed to believe that. It's based on their own bias and racist inner thinking. Meanwhile, we are learning that the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, are ignoring a court order that says they must end a practice of blanket refusal to grant asylum seekers humanitarian parole after they arrive in the United States. The judge named Boasberg of Washington, D.C., issued an injunction in July that said that ICE must decide whether to grant humanitarian parole to asylum seekers by examining each individual case. And before the Trump administration, more than 90% of people who applied for asylum were granted this parole. But at the 5 ICE field offices that have been studied by an ACLU in advance of a lawsuit, virtually no paroles were granted after Trump took office. In El Paso, all 349 parole requests made to that city's ICE field office between February and September of last year were denied. And if that is a data point that plays out across the country, well, that is a serious change, and it violates a court order. Across the country, in at least 17 states, prisoners are protesting from now until September 9th, demanding humane living conditions, an end to slavery in the form of prison labor at substandard wages. I mean, $1 an hour or less. They want to rescind the Prison Litigation Reform Act to give the incarcerated a proper channel to address grievances and rights violations. They want to fix the Truth in Sentencing Act and Sentencing Reform Act. They want an end to racial overcharging, to racist gang enhancements, the reinstatement of Pell Grants. Strikes me as a pretty legitimate list of issues. And the strike is organized by an abolitionist coalition, including Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee, the Free Alabama Movement, and others. Duncan Hunter is a Republican congressman from Southern California. He's been under investigation for months, and yesterday he and his wife were indicted on federal corruption charges, accused of spending more than $250,000 in campaign funds for personal expenses. And it's interesting because Duncan Hunter is a fairly young guy who has been serving in the seat that was vacated by a congressman who was convicted of corruption back during the Bush administration. And what's also fascinating is that last night, despite the blockbuster developments with the Manafort and Cohen cases, Rachel Maddow found time to cover the Duncan Hunter case. And it is news, it deserves to be covered. But my challenge is that when Jesse Jackson Jr. was accused of conviction, tried, and convicted, I can't remember Rachel Maddow even mentioning it, much less covering it. Two different versions of a news conference held by Senator Elizabeth Warren in Washington. On Tuesday, she unveiled a sweeping set of reforms to radically restrict and publicly expose corporate lobbying in Washington. I fully support her Anti-Corruption Act, which is aimed at closing the revolving doors that allow people to jump from government to high-paying industry jobs and then come back to government to unravel regulations for their high-paying clients. That's the pattern that we've seen, and she correctly identifies it, and she's trying to take the profit motive out of public service. Now, the report on her news conference and legislative proposal by The Intercept is extremely positive about Elizabeth Warren and about the scope of what she's talking about. But for a more critical view, I've linked to a commentary from Sam Husseini published at Consortium News. And he says, yes, Warren outlined with great specificity a host of proposals for eliminating financial conflicts, closing revolving doors, and reforming corporate structures. But Sam Husseini was there at the National Press Club, and he asked Warren if she agreed with Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who has proposed slashing the military budget to help pay for human and environmental needs. And Husseini also asked Warren if she would consider introducing and sponsoring a bill on Palestinians' children's rights in the Senate. And I want you to read, because it's not worth the time for me to read the empty answer that Elizabeth Warren gave. But it points up that, like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren is a champion of the American middle class. And I never take that away from her or from Sanders. But Bernie was very weak on foreign policy. During the 2016 campaign, he started to talk about it when it was, in my view, too late. And he has since shown a greater interest in the rights of the Palestinians, in a fair approach to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. And that's something Elizabeth Warren really needs to work on if she wants to run for president in 2020. Facebook announced yesterday it's identified multiple new influence campaigns, and they have removed 652 fake accounts that were misleading people all over the dang world. The activity originated in Iran and Russia, they said, and unlike past influence operations, which largely targeted Americans, the fake accounts were aimed at Latin America, Britain, and the Middle East. And to me, this is silly, because Facebook is generally an open platform, unless you're Telesur or some other proscribed leftist outlet. And the idea that some Facebook posts that were intended to sow discord and to divide Americans were crucial in the 2016 campaign is just ludicrous. We do a great job of dividing ourselves every day, and our media hypes it up, exploits it, profits from those divisions. And this latest move by Facebook may not have been the trigger, but yesterday, NYU professor of media Mark Crispin Miller announced that he's bailing on Facebook because they have generally blocked him in the last few months anyway, and he is giving up on the platform. I'm going to stick it out because I still have a good network of friends on Facebook and people who supply me with a lot of interesting information. And if that changes, I'll probably bail as well. Finally, today, you're probably well aware of the massive wildfires that we've been battling here in California. And one of them, the Mendocino Complex, which is the biggest fire in at least in California history. It charred a minimum of 400,000 acres in 4 counties. Well, during the early stages of fighting that fire. There was a group that had come from Santa Clara County, that's San Jose, up to Mendocino to help fight the fire. They brought with them a mobile command post that used Verizon Wireless to make its internet connection. And at the height of the fire, they discovered that the data flow had been throttled down to 1/200th of usual speed, rendering the systems almost unusable. And why? Because they had used up their data package, and Verizon would not give them more data traffic until they paid a $50 additional fee and paid up to an unlimited account for $99 a month. I don't think I can add much more to that one. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. Feel free to share it, and you'll find it on YouTube. I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.